Some books have characters that stick with you long after you close the book. And The House in the Cerulean Sea is a book where this definitely happened to me. So today I want to break down examples of how TJ Klune executed this in his book and how you can apply it to your own writing. So the characters here feel charming without feeling flat, quirky without feeling forced, and warm without losing emotional depth. They feel distinct very quickly, but they also feel emotionally easy to spend time with. I think that combination can be a lot harder to pull off than it looks. And I really did fall in love with these characters. I missed them when I finished the book. I immediately read the second book because I just did not want to leave these characters behind. And as writers, I think that reaction is really worth paying attention to. Because when a cast creates that kind of attachment, it usually isn't random. It usually means the author is doing something very intentional underneath the surface. There are specific craft choices shaping that feeling, even if the reading experience itself feels effortless. So in this video, I want to look at what the book is doing so well with those charming characters and what fiction writers can take from it. Number 1, the characters feel emotionally inviting. One of the smartest things this book does is create a strong emotional contrast right from the beginning. And I think that contrast is a huge part of why the characters become so lovable so quickly. Before Linus ever gets to the orphanage, the children are framed as dangerous, secretive, and deeply concerning. The book doesn't open by inviting us to feel warmth toward them or curiosity in a soft, open way. Instead, it lets the bureaucracy define them first, which means they arrive in the story already burdened by a suspicion, secrecy, and institutional fear. Linus is told, "The orphanage you'll be going to it's special, Mr. Baker. The orphanage is non-traditional, and the 6 children who live there are different than anything else you've seen before, some more than others. They're problematic." Problematic? What's that supposed to? "Your job will be to make sure everything is on the up and up," Handsome said, a small smile on his face. And I think this setup is really important because the book is very deliberately giving both Linus and the reader one expectation before replacing it with another. We are told to expect danger, disorder, and something fundamentally unmanageable. We are told to approach this place with suspicion, which means the book is laying the groundwork for a very specific emotional reversal. Because when Linus actually arrives, what the book gives us is not horror, it is warmth, it is domesticity, it is the feeling of a household that already exists as a real lived-in place rather than a threatening site of chaos. And Arthur is a huge part of why that shift works so well. Arthur does not talk about the children like they are threats to be contained or problems to be solved. He talks about them with care, familiarity, and affection. One of my favorite details is when he's walking Linus around to see the children's bedrooms. He pointed toward a hatch in the ceiling. The outline of a wyvern had been drawn on it. Theodore's nest is up in the turret. He has a small hoard up there, but his favorite place is under the couch. I love that detail because it is doing so much work in such a small space. Theodore is not being introduced as a dangerous, magical being, or even primarily as a fantasy creature. He is being introduced like a child in a home. A child with preferences, habits, and whose favorite place is under the couch. That is a very domestic, affectionate kind of observation, and it immediately changes the emotional texture of the house. It makes the orphanage feel lived in. It makes the children feel known. And more than that, it makes them feel already loved, which is such an important distinction. And then you get someone like Lucy, who I think is one of the clearest examples of the book's larger strategy. Because Lucy, on paper, should be terrifying. He is built from an idea that sounds extreme, and when he first appears, he absolutely leans into that image. The scene goes like this. "It's nice to see you," Lucy sings a song before giggling. "I knew you'd come, Mr. Baker, though by the time I'm done with you, you'll wish you hadn't." The smile widened until it seemed like his face would split in half. Flames began to rise behind him, though they didn't seem to burn the house, and Linus couldn't feel the heat that should have been pouring off of them. "I'm going to enjoy this far more than you could ever. That's enough, Lucy." And just like that, everything switched off. And what I think is so effective here is that the book keeps the theatrical menace, but does not let that menace define the emotional reality of the scene. Lucy gets to be strange, dramatic, and delightfully unsettling, but the story never loses control of the emotional framing around him. Arthur's interruption reminds us immediately that this is still a child in a cared-for environment and not a monster taking over the page. It keeps the oddness fully intact, but surrounds it with warmth, care, and emotional safety. I think that is a really important lesson for writers. A character does not become inviting when their sharp edges disappear. A character becomes inviting when the story gives those sharp edges the right emotional context, so the reader can stay open instead of shutting down. And that is exactly what this book does so well. Before it asks us to admire these characters, it makes us feel safe spending time with them. Number 2. Every character has an instantly memorable core. The next thing this book does incredibly well is make each character feel distinct. Very, very quickly. And I think this is one of those craft areas where writers sometimes make the process harder than it needs to be. When we hear the phrase memorable character, it is easy to imagine that memorability has to come from complexity right away. From pages of backstory, elaborate lore, or some layered psychological reveal that takes a while to unfold. But in practice, that is often not where memorability starts. More often, it begins with clarity, a strong first impression, a clear emotional signature, and the sense that the moment this person walks onto the page, you understand what kind of energy they bring to the story. Chauncey is a perfect example because he could have been memorable in a very shallow way. The book could have relied only on the fact that he looks unusual and let that do all the work. But instead, it gives him something much stronger than visual novelty. It gives him a very specific, earnest, unmistakable personality that immediately tells us who he is. So we get this moment in the book. As tentacles with tiny little suckers along their lengths, he was not quite see-through, though Linus could make out the faint outline of Sal hiding behind him. "I'm not wearing a coat," Linus heard himself say, though he hadn't actually instructed his brain to say it. Chauncey frowned. "Oh, that's disappointing." His eyes wiggled around as he seemed to brighten. As in literally brighten, because he became a lighter shade of green. "No matter, I've already attended to your luggage, sir. It's been placed in your room, as has the barbaric cage I assume is for your cat that is now sleeping on your pillow." He held out one of his tentacles. Linus stared at it. Chauncey coughed, flipping the tip of his tentacle toward him twice. And this is such a great example of a memorable character construction, because what makes Chauncey stand out is that he is odd in a very particular, coherent, readable way. He has this formal, eager, bellhop energy that feels completely sincere, and that sincerity is what makes the whole thing land. He is disappointed by the lack of a coat, he has already attended to the luggage, he is trying with complete seriousness to extend hospitality in the role he has clearly imagined for himself. And the book gives him one strong identity hook and commits to it, which means that almost instantly we know what kind of delight he's going to bring whenever he appears on the page. Then you have Talia, who shows a completely different route to memorability. Talia stands out through voice, and the speed with which the book establishes that voice is part of what makes her so effective. She does not need a long explanation or carefully built entrance. She just needs one line that lands with enough force to tell you exactly who she is. So in the book, she says, "She doesn't like you," Talia said. "Don't feel too bad about it, though. She doesn't like most people. It isn't personal, I don't think. She would just rather you weren't here. Or alive." And that line tells you so much so quickly. And clearly she is not interested in softening herself to make other people comfortable. And because the line is delivered so cleanly, the impression lands immediately. So what I really like about putting Chauncey and Talia next to each other is that they prove charm does not have to come from one single kind of energy. Chauncey is charming through specificity and sweetness. Talia is charming through sharpness and force of personality. But both work for the same underlying reason. The book gives both of them an instantly readable core. You meet them, and within seconds, you understand what makes them different from everyone else in the room. That identity can come from voice, it can come from a dream, it can come from a habit, a contradiction, a role they keep trying to play, or a way of speaking that instantly separates them from the rest of the cast. But whatever form it does take, it has to feel clear enough that the character leaves an impression right away. 3. The charm is grounded in vulnerability. This is the part that keeps the cast from feeling shallow, because charm on its own can only carry a character so far. If they were only funny or only aesthetically memorable, that would not be enough to create the kind of attachment this book creates. At some point, charm needs emotional depth underneath it. It needs something tender, fragile, or painful that gives the warmth of the character real weight. And I think Sal is one of the clearest examples of that in the entire book. So let's take a look at this moment. Sal glanced at Linus, then turned his gaze downward. His lips moved, but Linus couldn't make out what he was saying. Neither could Mr. Parnassus, or so it seemed. "Louder, please, so we can hear you." Sal's shoulders slumped. "I learned that I still get scared of people I don't know." Mr. Parnassus reached out and squeezed his arm. "And that's okay, because even the bravest of us can still be afraid sometimes, so long as we don't let our fear become all we know." He is emotionally exposed here. He is naming fear plainly and directly, and that kind of openness changes the way the reader relates to him. He is no longer just memorable. He is reachable. They feel emotionally real enough to care about. And what makes the moment even stronger is Arthur's response. Arthur does not shame him. He does not dismiss the fear, minimize it, or rush in with some flattened version of "be brave" that would make the scene feel less honest. Instead, he makes space for what Sal is feeling. He reassures him without taking the fear away, and he treats that fear as something survivable and human rather than something embarrassing. It is also giving us an environment where vulnerability is handled with care, and that makes an enormous difference in how the charm lands. Because charm becomes much more powerful when there is fear underneath it, hurt underneath it, or softness there. Some emotional truth the reader can actually touch. And that emotional reality is one of the biggest reasons readers grow so attached to them. Number 4, relationships amplify the charm. And finally, I think this is where the book really secures the whole effect. Because these characters are charming individually, but they become even more charming through relationship. A lovable cast is not just a pile of lovable individuals standing next to each other, each with their own gimmick or memorable trait, but what actually creates attachment is connection. It is the way characters reveal one another, soften one another, and comfort, and change in response to one another. A reader may notice a character because that character is distinctive, but a reader usually falls in love with a cast because the relationships make those distinctions feel emotionally alive. And I think the Linus and Lucy broken record scene is a perfect example of that. "I broke my records," Lucy said bitterly. He stepped away from Arthur, wiping an arm across his face. "I loved them so much, and now they're broken." He stared pathetically down at the shards of shiny black plastic on the floor. "None of that," Linus admonished. "These were only the ones on your wall, correct?" He walked farther into the room and crouched down next to Lucy, picking up a piece of broken record. "Not all of them," Lucy said. "Some of them were ones I listened to. They were even my favorites." "Can I tell you something?" Lucy nodded, staring down at his records. Linus picked up another piece. It looked as if it fit with the piece he already had. He pushed them together in front of Lucy. They went together perfectly, making a whole. When something is broken, you can put it back together. It may not fit quite the same or work like it did once before, but that doesn't mean it's no longer useful. Look, see. A bit of glue and a bit of luck, and it'll be right as rain. Why, hanging on your wall, you wouldn't even be able to tell the difference. And what I love about this scene is how clearly it shows the shift in Linus, because he is no longer simply observing this household from the outside. He's not standing apart with that professional distance he had at the beginning of the book, and taking notes on people rather than truly joining them. Here, he crouches beside Lucy. He helps, he comforts, and he speaks gently and with patience. And the entire scene carries the feeling of someone who is no longer evaluating a child, but caring for one. And because of that, Lucy changes in our eyes too. We are looking at a hurt child being comforted by someone who loves him. And that relational context deepens everything we already felt about him. That is what relationship does in a story. It deepens character, and it turns charm into attachment. The individual traits still matter, of course, but relationship gives those traits emotional consequence. And I think that is one of the biggest reasons the cast lingers after the book ends. The relationships do not support the characters, they amplify them. They make every individual more lovable by showing how the care moves between them. And in a book like this, that movement of care is a huge part of what makes the entire cast feel unforgettable. So when I think about why The House in the Cerulean Sea does charming characters so well, I don't think the answer is just that the cast is quirky. I think the answer is much more deliberate than that. And this book makes its characters charming because it makes them emotionally inviting. It gives them instant readable cores, it grounds them in vulnerability, and then it demons all of that through relationship. That combination is what makes the cast linger and what makes the readers miss them. And if you want more deep dives on writing craft, I'd love if you join my newsletter for free at xplovecat.com/newsletter. Happy writing.